Hello guys and welcome back. Today it's time to continue with the Tiger 1 from Takom. In the last two parts I did all the construction as well as the basic painting and chipping effects using acrylics. This part will be all about weathering, including washes and mud effects and some more details. And without further ado, let's begin. I will first take a look at the lower hull. Here I need some basic mud effects. As most of this will be hidden behind the tracks and wheels later anyway, it is a good place to start and experiment with new techniques a bit. And this time I want to start by applying some pigments. These two colors form the base. I chose a lighter and a darker earth tone. I simply distribute the pigments all over the entire bottom area. Furthermore, I can adjust and move the position a little bit with a brush. I focus the pigments more on the ground. The closer areas are to the ground, the more likely dirt is to collect here. With the lighter tone, I can try to create some color difference. However, in the end there was no noticeable difference, as most of this will be covered. To fix the pigments in place, I am using AK's pigment fixer. The glue is added with a pipette this time. And don't worry if everything goes dark like this. As soon as the glue has dried, the pigments will return to their previous color and will sit firmly where they should. To fill some of the larger gaps and hide the ejector pin marks, I use a ready-made mud from AK Interactive. This is mainly about the volume and texture, as the color won't be visible later. And since this mud is acrylic based, I can dilute it a bit with water and manipulate it. The idler wheel and drive sprocket are still missing an important detail. The areas where they come into contact with the metal of the tracks must be painted silver or a similar metallic color, because the shiny metal will be visible here. And since all the individual parts of the tracks are painted now, I can start assembling them. Working with a single larger piece for each side should be a little easier than keeping track of dozens of small wheels and the fragile tracks themselves. To glue, I have to use a super glue or similar glue, which works on parts that have already been painted. And this is how the tank looks now. The tracks were a bit tricky to assemble, but I'm just glad I have them attached now before any further mud effects and details are painted on them to make it even more difficult. And speaking about effects, let's begin with a washing. Lately I enjoy mixing my own washes using oil colors. In this case, Abteilung 502 Sepia thinned with white spirit. The wash is applied around all details, but only those on the steel. I will get to the zimmerit later. Before applying the wash, it is recommended to apply a layer of clear varnish to protect your acrylic colors. When it comes to whether you should use a glossy, matte or semi-gloss finish, opinions vary. I tried both. Although I think it is easier to work with a glossy surface, I had problems with this on my Hetzer. I just couldn't manage to get the shiny surface matte again, and that's why I decided this time to stay with a matte varnish. Here you can see a nice difference between the details that have already been highlighted by a wash and those that I haven't done anything with yet. A matte surface has a clear disadvantage compared to a shiny one. The capillary effect is significantly weaker. But by simply using more thinner, you can counteract this disadvantage quite well. For large areas like here, I like to brush the surface with white spirit beforehand. It makes the transition smoother and increases the, as mentioned, capillary effect. Applying a wash is always a very nice step. This bit of color always has such a big impact. It helps wonderfully not only to highlight the details, but also makes the surface look more used and worn. Once the applied wash dries, it will look pretty messy at first. But all you need is a brush with a little bit of white spirit. The previously dried wash can be reactivated and blended to achieve a smooth transition. And any spots that have too much wash in general can simply be cleaned away. Next, I apply a wash to the Zimmerit. The premix Damp Earth from AK has a nice shade in my opinion. Applying a wash to Zimmerit is always a controversial topic. While this is a great surface texture for shadows, in reality Zimmerit is rather flat and doesn't cast that large shadows. That's why my wash here is significantly lighter than the previous one. In my opinion, a wash that is too dark here would create too much of a contrast. And I really like the color choice. The texture is beautifully highlighted without being too eye-catching. Now the washing is finished. I'm quite satisfied with the result, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments. In the last episode, I painted all the tools and metal cables in grey tones. Now to add some color, I give them some rust effects with AK's Rust Wash. The same wash is also used on the exhausts. The rust effect on the exhausts is then enhanced with some darker rust pigments. And as a final touch, I can add a small amount of smoke pigment to the top, where the exhaust would leave soot. Last part, I forgot to paint the inside of the exhaust covers, so let me do it quickly. Then I give them a quick rust chipping, starting with a dark rust tone and using lighter and lighter colors with each step. Rust and smoke pigments are then also applied to the inside. And now I can cover the exhaust systems with the covers and make the work I did disappear. But at least I filmed it. The spare tracks mounted on the turret also need some noticeable rust effects. This time I would like to use the weathering pencils from AK. The biggest part that is still missing are the dirt effects. For the base texture and volume, I wanted to try out this newly bought product from Vallejo. This is a pre-made mud mix that has some static grass already mixed in. I want to add it in between each track link. Larger chunks would get stuck there while driving through meadows or mud. This stuff is a little easier to use with a toothpick because I can easily push it into the gaps. The mud is handy if you don't want to mix it yourself, but in the end it is just regular acrylic mud with some static grass, nothing you can't do yourself. In some places I applied a little too much, as it turned out later. With tweezers I was able to free up some individual areas as soon as it dried. Now I can begin the more delicate steps with Ammo by Mix enamel mud effects. The first one is a light brown turned earth effect. I apply it with a small brush all over the previously added mud. It is important to make sure the different muddy areas on your vehicle work together. And since I want to use these enamel effects on the remaining parts, I have to make sure the color of the track mud matches the rest. With a bit of white spirit, it is also very easy to make a muddy wash out of this that flows over and all around the tracks itself. The next effects I read about in a book that was all about mud and weathering. Dry mud and dust accumulations around hedges and raised details. First, I apply the mud around the hedges and larger details. A round brush works great for that. Once the mud has dried for a few minutes, I need a flat brush moistened in white spirit. With that, I can begin to blur and blend the effect. During this step, it is also easy to remove and clean any spots that you have accidentally hit. Effects like these are the main reason I love enamel mud products so much. This look would be a lot harder to recreate with regular water-based products, and once acrylic mud is dry, you can't reactivate it in any way, so your mistakes would stay permanent. If you want, you can use different tones to recreate different levels of moisture in the dirt. I will go with this dry step color in certain spots this time. And just like before, I can use some white spirit to blend both colors. Once dry, the effect has a matte finish with a really nice texture. And now for the splashes. Those will be added by blowing air onto a moistened brush loaded with mud. The first layer is made from a dry mud splatter. Those splashes simulate areas affected by mud splashed while the vehicle was moving. It is applied to both sides and to the front and rear of the tank. Splashes that are too large or look unrealistic can be fixed or removed with a brush moistened with more enamel thinners. With rainfall, dried up dirt would begin to streak down the sides. This visual effect can simply be achieved by dragging the fresh mud splashes downward with a flat brush. If the paint has already begun to dry, just moisten the brush with enamel thinners again. Then the previous steps are all repeated, this time with a darker tone to simulate some wet and fresher mud. Since this tiger still has all its side skirts as well as the mud flaps, I can't go too hard on these effects, as most mud would be kept under the tank. If I ever build another tiger, which I probably will, I will definitely remove some side skirts to create larger mud deposits. I should not forget to also give the road wheels some mud treatment. As to be expected, these steps are the same, with both lighter and darker tones. The only difference is that I will try to keep the outer rubber part of each wheel cleaner. And now it gets a bit more messy. I want to create a thicker mud with the same colors. And for that, I have to mix the enamel colors with some fine sand. This mix is then applied to the lowest parts of the hull. The texture is really interesting and different from all the pre-made mud effects I used before. The lower areas like these will usually have larger amounts of thick and wet mud stuck to them. I can also add the same mix to the places where the crew would walk and climb onto the tank. One thing I noticed is that even after drying, the mud is still very loose and easy to rub off with your finger, probably because of the sand mixed into it. So in the end, I coated all the larger chunks with pigment fixer and let them harden. After that, they were firmly in place. And for the final details, I need some static grass and the pigments I used so far. I scatter these randomly over the vehicle and push them into corners where dirt and dead vegetation would collect. Once that's done, I seal everything again with pigment fixer. To remove any remaining glue residue, I then cover the entire model with a matte varnish. last but not least, the machine gun for the turret is missing. The one included in the set doesn't have a magazine for some reason, so I will stick on a replacement one from Tamiya. The gun is painted with gunmetal metallic and red-brown. And with that, we are finished with the tank and have reached the end of today's episode. Let's take a look at the final result. I am very happy with this project. The model from Takom was an outstanding base that didn't even need any upgrades. And with all the weathering effects done, the tank looks even better. This was my most time-consuming model to date, but I can say that it was worth every minute. But what do you say? Let me know in the comments. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss anything in the future. Thank you for watching and see you next time.